Well, greetings and welcome. It's nice to have you here for this guided meditation and Dharma talk. My name is Jonathan Foust, and I'm really grateful that you have made the time to be here. Got a really interesting talk ahead on love and the fear of losing love. So it's going to be good, I think. At least I have found it to be really informative. But before we begin, some acknowledgments. A big thank you to our producers, to Glenn Harrison and Leo Gimo for making this possible, to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for streaming this. Shout out to my friends at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington in Arlington, Virginia. And not least to our mindful movement teacher for today, to Rita Moran, and to Ray Manioki for offering mindful dialogue after this session. The whole Monday night experience, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard, mindful movement with Rita, get you all loose and prepped. And then at 7:30, the meditation and talk. And afterward, you can join Ray for mindful dialogue, an opportunity to connect with like-minded folks. You can find those links on my website and on my Facebook page. I have a mailing list. Feel free to sign up. I offer kind of a monthly compendium of talks and my best photography for the month. And finally, of course, this is all offered freely in the spirit of generosity. And if you ever feel inspired to support this offering, thank you so much. There is a fair bit of expense with the technology to get this out there. But the whole idea here is that no one's denied access. So that's it for announcements. We are going to dive into a short meditation now. So you might like to take a few moments to stretch, move, get the wiggles out, whatever you need to do to kind of prepare yourself. And you might like to close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. There's always something so powerful in the closing of the eyes. This shifting from outer awareness to heightening the perception of inner awareness. You might take a few moments just to notice how, with the eyes closed, can you sense or imagine this quality of non-judging self-observation? Noticing the different streams in your experience right now. The stream of sensations, the sense of where you feel the breath on the inside right now. The stream of sounds that are happening right now. Where do you feel the air touching your skin right now? One of the streams is this stream of constantly shifting sensations. You might notice that there is also a stream of thoughts, about 50,000 thoughts a day, just passing through like clouds, taking form and then dispersing. There's also a stream of what we could call emotions, kind of the limbic system. Sense of the heart closed, the heart opened. Sadness, joy. All kinds of emotions taking form. And all changing over time. You may notice there are even different states of consciousness that come and go. A state of open spaciousness, a state of feeling more shut down, more internally focused. With everything that's changing, like weather systems, can you also sense that there's something here that's aware of what's changing? Just in your own way, just to acknowledge that. One of the doorways to heightening this sense of the observer or the witness is to deepen your sense of relaxation and presence. The more you relax, the more you feel, the more you feel, the more you notice. So you might just sense right now the muscles of your face. Is it possible to soften the muscles around the eyes, the lips, letting the jaw hang from your skull? All the little micro expressions, just very gently relaxing, letting go, feeling your face expressionless. You might feel the inside of your mouth, feeling the volume of your tongue, the space inside your mouth. And can you sense from the inside the weight, the heaviness, and the volume of your arms? And the more you feel this sense of heaviness in the arms, the more you may notice a deepening sense of presence inside, a relaxing, a letting go. If you sense the space between your navel and your spine, is it possible to relax and feel whatever's happening here? You might notice the more you relax, again, the more you might begin to feel. Feeling now the weight and the volume of your legs, heaviness of your legs. The soles of your feet and the heels, sensing from the inside out what's happening right here, right now. Is it possible to feel intimately what's happening on the inside and at the same time to sense this quality of the observer? You might, in your own time, let your attention settle on one particular point. It might be the feeling of the breath on the inside, at the belly or the nostrils. It might be the sounds. It might be the feeling in the palms of the hands. Just finding one point in this field of the senses where you can both relax and focus your attention. And for this next period of time, let your attention rest with this sense of here and now, right at this point of contact. This breath, or these sound vibrations, this felt sense inside. In this stream of constant change, is it possible to observe what's shifting and what's changing on the inside? When you notice the stream of commentary and thought predominating, how gently can you let it go and re-arrive? Breath, sound, feeling. You might explore, if it feels right for you, widening your attention beyond this point of contact of breath or sound or feeling to embrace everything that's changing. And partially, the doorway here is to relax even more, to let your attention open 360 degrees, and to inquire from time to time 2 questions. What exactly is happening right now? Can I let it be? One element of practice here is to gather your attention through focus and concentration. As you sense this breath, you may sense this gathering right now. Another quality is the sense of the witness, observing what's changing, being the monitor of change. And yet a third quality is this quality of letting be. And you might explore in this remaining minute, letting go of any sense of doing and relaxing even more into a sense of being. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, just simply to relax and feel and notice. What could relax or soften right now? What could relax and soften even more than that? You might begin now to deepen your breath, sensing what may have shifted for you over this last period of time of focusing inward, noticing the quality of presence. Let your body begin to move and shift in any way that feels good, and taking your time now for your transition. There's no hurry, there's no rush. And welcome back. Many, many years ago, long story, which I'll try to keep short. When the spiritual community I was living in, the ashram I was living in, melted down through a bit of a scandal, we were all sort of turned out and had to figure out what the heck we were going to do with the rest of our lives. In the Shaker community, they would, this is, a couple hundred years ago, when you left the community, they'd give you $100, a horse, and the tools of your trade. In our community, it was pretty much, thanks for your service, bye. Out of a sense of desperation and then finally a sense of inspiration, my wife and I bought a used motorhome and took off teaching all around the country. And along the way, we ended up getting a dog. And this dog was a Royal Standard Poodle, big poodle. Like in his prime, he was about 115, 120 pounds, big guy. I was traveling with him down in Florida in one of our tours. And there was this old man who just lit up when he saw the dog. So we went over to say hello, and my dog immediately liked him. And just the way he interacted with him, I could tell that he spoke poodle. There's a very particular breed. And so we started talking, and he told me how he had had a number of standard poodles in his life and how much he loved them. And he went on, and I asked him, I said, well, will you get another one? And he looked me in the eye and he said, I couldn't bear to lose another one. And I saw the love in his eyes, and I saw the suffering in his eyes. And I know that suffering as I had to be there as my dog passed. And I imagine you've had similar experiences. The profound sense of love and connection and intimacy with another being, whether it be human or non-human. And then the pain that comes from that attachment. What I'd like to explore with you is about love and what's called the near enemy of love. In this tradition, there are states and then the near enemies. The near enemy looks like it, but it's not exactly it. And the near enemy of love is attachment. So in 4 parts, as I usually do, first, I'd like to talk about love. Like, what exactly is love? And then the second part, of course, attachment. I'll explore some of the different attachment styles, how attachment forms, and in part 3, to explore the importance of cultivating healthy connection. Well, what is healthy attachment? And finally, some thoughts on how to cultivate the opposite, which is how to cultivate love and acceptance. How do you cultivate a state of love and letting go? It's been a juicy topic for me. I've really explored a lot around my own life in terms of attachment styles. And so our relationship to love, when you look at it, we can look at the ancient Greeks who made some distinctions. They made a distinction between eros and agape. Eros is sort of the carnal love, and agape is spiritual love. And Plato also observed that romance and sex and infatuation makes us do things that we look back on with a certain degree of horror. I ran across this line that the tingling feeling when you really like someone, that's common sense leaving your body. And because of that sense of how romance, sex, and infatuation, aka attachment, makes us do things we look back on with horror, he talked about a higher ideal, kind of a non-sexual love, which we call platonic love. And I think it's safe to say we all have this impulse toward connectedness. But there are different conceptions of that conceptionness, of that connectedness. There are different conceptions of love. There's sort of like Walt Disney love, the fairy tales. And the idea of romantic love didn't really begin until the 18th century in France with courtly love. This idea, this celebrated sense of romantic love was celebrated in songs and stories, and that sense of like finding your one true love became part of our mythology and part of our internalized perception of what love is. I spent a fair bit of time practicing celibacy in my ashram days. As I say, 6 years, 6 years, 6 months, 2 weeks, and 48 hours. But we used to tell a story to ourselves to keep talking ourselves into this practice. And practicing celibacy when you're practicing a lot of yoga and eating really healthy in your 20s and 30s is quite a practice. It's the story of Saint Tulsidas. And the story goes that this young man, Tulsidas, was infatuated with this woman a young woman from another village. He could not stop thinking about her. And so one night he just couldn't take it any longer. He just had to see her. So he got his best white clothes and he took off. And he had to go through a forest and through a swamp, had to cross a river. And he got to her village and he climbed a tree outside her window and he called out to her. And she went out to her balcony and there he was, covered in mud. His hair was messed up. His eyes were wild. And she looked at him and said, "Wow, if you loved God as much as you love me, you'd be enlightened by now." Tulsidas goes, "Oh my God, you're right." And he goes off to seek God. So it's the story, this transmutation of looking for intimacy, connectedness, that sense of melding with another. It's transmuting it to a kind of a higher level. That's the story we told ourselves. But it's interesting because when you seek love and connection, what is the essence that you're looking for in relationship? Connection, intimacy, to be seen, to be known. One definition of love is that love is a set of emotions and behaviors characterized by intimacy, passion, and commitment. So intimacy, passion, and commitment sounds pretty healthy and wholesome, right? Who doesn't want that? But I think the question is, can you discern whether your feelings for another, for love, are rooted in healthy desire for connection, or are you seeking validation? Are you seeking security? Are you seeking someone who can fulfill all of your unmet needs? And so when you examine your relationship with love and your relationship to attachment, there's all kinds of forms of love. There's sexual love, there's parental love, there's platonic love, there's sort of partnered love. It's a gnarly topic. Love and kindness and compassion and joy are qualities that we cultivate in mindfulness practice. But that near enemy to love, that kind of looks like, but it's not it, is this sense of grasping, this sense of holding on, the inability to let go, this quality of attachment. And attachment can show up as possessiveness. It can show up as fear. It can show up as jealousy. So this is kind of a cool distinction. You can think of love as kind of multifaceted, and it radiates outward towards someone who you perceive as irreplaceable. So love radiates outward to another person. Attachment is more self-serving, and it echoes inward whatever sense of security and satisfaction someone can give you. So love goes out. Attachment goes in. And we have this primal desire to connect, to be part of a bigger whole. But we also have a primal fear of being rejected, of being ostracized. It's easy to see where this comes from. As a human species, we could not survive alone. So being ostracized or being rejected literally would mean death. And I think we have that so deeply internalized in our consciousness. So here we have this possibility of love, of connection, this drive. But we also have this kind of shadow side of attachment. So, a little story. Someone really realized how unhappy she was in her relationships. This person really valued her independence and her personal space. That was the most important thing to her. She grew up in an environment where emotions were rarely expressed. And if you expressed your emotions, that vulnerability was perceived as weakness. So she learned how to keep her emotions to herself, and she learned how to prioritize self-sufficiency. And in romantic relationships, she was drawn to partners who were looking for intimacy and closeness and passion. It was attractive to her, but then she would feel overwhelmed, and she'd feel suffocated by her partner's emotional demands. And they would ask for more connection, or they'd express their needs. She would instinctively retreat and create distance. She would often find solace in her alone time, her work, her hobbies. And internally, she was pretty sure that relying on others for emotional support would lead to disappointment and to vulnerability. So her partners naturally would become frustrated and hurt by her detachment. They wanted more connection, but if she tried to reciprocate in a way that she desired, she'd start to feel overwhelmed and feel flooded. So you can get a sense of her deep dissatisfaction. Over time, she started to realize that her fear of intimacy and vulnerability was actually preventing her from the depth and the richness of love. She began to feel that the dry quality she was experiencing inside was perhaps related to her defense mechanisms, her attachment style. And the good news is that as she began to practice more self-awareness and more self-exploration, began to see that all of her past conditioning was holding her back. So she started to explore the depth of that conditioning with mindfulness, reflecting, and some therapy. And she began to dismantle those walls that she built inside. And eventually, over time, she found that she could forge deeper connections. That it was safe to communicate her needs and her fears and to feel more understood. And the good news is that over time, she began to realize that she could value her independence, but also balance it with emotional availability and genuine connection. That she could find a secure space where she could grow inside, but also be in a more intimate relationship. Now, that particular attachment style just happens to be mine. Again, coming out of conditioning and showing up in all kinds of ways in my life. And it's so interesting when you really begin to examine your attachment style, and I'll dive into these in a little bit. We have this innate drive for attachment. At some point, that drive for attachment isn't met. So you learn to stifle certain parts of who you are, and then you lose this connection to yourself. And you end up trying to solve the problem of being disconnected to yourself. Maybe you can relate. In fact, if you take a moment just to close your eyes, or if you're driving, please don't close your eyes. If you would, just take 3 slow breaths. take a moment to think of just a relationship that didn't work out. And if you would, if it feels okay, just take a few moments to sense the connectedness you once felt and how that may have devolved into a sense of separation, a sense of not feeling seen, not feeling heard. And is there a sense of what went wrong? What happened? Part of the doorway to seeing more clearly into how our sense of intimacy, our desire for intimacy breaks down is to become more aware of your attachment style. If you like, you can deepen your breath and open your eyes. Now, there are different models for different attachment styles, but this is just one to try on. You can think of it in terms of like 4. And they're all overlapping and they're sort of gradations. They're all on a scale, but some people have a very secure attachment style. They're comfortable with intimacy. They've got a positive view of themselves. They've got a high degree of trust. They're emotionally available. I know a few people like this, and they just bug me. Mostly because I'm a little jealous. This is the kind of person who walks into a room and they just sort of assume that people will respond with care. They have no trouble expressing their needs. They're comfortable with closeness and independence. Maybe you know some people like that. And just how for the rest of us, how irritating that can be. I'm mostly happy for them. It just points to my own kind of growing edges. Another attachment style can be described as sort of like anxious around intimacy, maybe preoccupied. And when we're in that anxious state, we're needing reassurance. We're worried about our partner's commitment. We're kind of overly sensitive to the cues, the fear of abandonment. And we're find ourselves seeking validation again and again and again. So if in those times where you know someone who's often seeking kind of excessive reassurance or worried about their partner's feelings, maybe overly anxious around rejection or abandonment, there's a propensity to interpret minor relationship conflicts as evidence of impending doom. That's that quality of anxious and preoccupied. Kind of the opposite of that is the avoidant or the dismissive attachment style. Kind of avoiding emotional closeness, difficulty expressing emotions, valuing independence, keeping distance, where personal space and independence is more important than that emotional connection. So if you know of anyone, or perhaps you at times struggle to share your feelings, you tend to keep your emotions to yourself, you find it very hard to rely on others or ask, you find it hard to fully engage in deep emotional connections, this is a sign of that avoidant dismissive style. The fourth is kind of a blend of the anxious and the avoidant. And it's a very complex state where you desire closeness, but the fear of hurt, the fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment is also part of it. So a lot of contradictory behavior. You're wanting closeness, but at the same time, there are kind of deep-seated fears of being hurt or overwhelmed or damaged in some way. So you can sense here, and again, these are all part of a scale, that there are times when you feel secure, perhaps. Or you're comfortable with intimacy, you kind of have your cup is overflowing. There are times you feel anxious, preoccupied, kind of obsessing on what's wrong. times when you're avoidant, times when you're that mix of fear and avoidant. The most important thing to recognize is the possibility that it's not your fault, which is a really deep inquiry. Like, what if it's not your fault? And as I've explored my own avoidant, dismissive tendencies, so much of my life has been around keeping distance, keeping my space, etc., etc. When I really reflect that it's not my fault, it allows me, it gives me permission to look at the conditioning behind that. And to recognize that, there's good news and there's bad news when it comes to looking at my particular attachment style. Whether it's secure, anxious, avoidant, fearful avoidant, the bad news is it's there. And it touches into every aspect of your relationship to making more room for love and intimacy and connection. That's the bad news. It's there. The good news is you're onto yourself. Just seeing your conditioning, it's so powerful. And what I find even more powerful is to really get, if you really want to change, look really closely at how your actions affect others. So when I go into avoidant patterns, and I get feedback as to how my avoidant patterns show up for another person, I'm a lot more incentivized to change. And I'm very, very lucky because my wonderful wife is pretty adept at offering me feedback. And when I withdraw, when I go into my own world, my projects, my passions, I recognize that these are things that I really enjoy. I take a lot of joy in that. But it's also a device for moving away from something painful. And that shows up for Tara as abandoning her. So she feels abandoned and unloved. When I can take that in, it's so powerful, it's so helpful, because I'm not wanting to create harm. And I value that sense of connectedness. So it's helped me to grow a lot. And it's really important, I think, to acknowledge that this drive for connection, the drive for love and intimacy and healthy attachment is part of our nature. And also how difficult it is, how challenging it is, because those patterns can be so, so strong. So how do we heal this? I ran across this story in the New Yorker about a particular coach who was, I think he was at that time like the best paid business coach in the world or something like that. And they told this story of how he was being called in to work with a vice president of some company. So he went in and he met with this VP and he was asking him questions. He said, well, how's your relationship with your wife? The guy said, oh, it's great. We talk a lot. We're on the same team. He said, what's your relationship like with your kids? He goes, oh, they're good. They're in school. They're really motivated. We get along just great. And his coach said, well, what's their phone number? Let's call them. So he called the wife, asked how the relationship was. She went on and on about his narcissism, about his misogyny, how dissatisfied she was. He called the kids. They talked about how remote he was, how controlling he was, how he didn't listen. It was a really stunning thing to read. This distinction between the story we tell ourselves and then the reality of how we show up. This is a great line from Werner Erhard, kind of the founder of EST. He said that who you are is how you show up in another person's life. You might tell yourself you're loving and kind, but if you show up as not loving and kind, that's who you are. So there's this big distinction between your story and your actions. So a little Zen pop quiz. you don't mind. And close your eyes. And again, just take 3 slow breaths. Let yourself relax and soften on the out breath. And if you could bring into mind a relationship that just feels a little bit off, where you feel some sense of separation or cut off or betrayed or not understood. And if you would, and I know it's asking a lot here, if you can imagine a scene that kind of represents that conflict. And if you would, take a few moments to bring it in a little bit closer. If you're a visual person, you might visualize yourself and the other person. You might recall words or tone of voice. And then take a moment to sense what it feels like inside as you think about it. And just let yourself respond to the following questions. What are the most predominant emotions right now? And is there a sense of the unmet need? What are you needing? What are you wanting that's not happening here? Now imagine that you could just sort of slip into the other person's body. What do you imagine they're feeling? And what do you imagine they're needing or wanting that's not happening? And then if you would, just take a moment and imagine, how would the other person describe your actions, how you show up here? And if you like, you can deepen your breath, and as you're ready, you can open your eyes. I hope that was a valuable reflection. I know that was fast, but this idea of like who you are is how you show up in someone else's life. It's the value of role reversal, to really imagine what another person's perspective is, what they feel, how they would describe it, their needs. But it also has a lot to do with the value of feedback. I remember back in my forum training, again in the spirit of Werner Erhard, they talked about the value of feedback. That if you could find someone who would be honest with you, to ask this question: how do I show up in your life? How do I really show up in your life? And how, if you could find someone who could be honest, that feedback is invaluable. Now, depending on your attachment style, sometimes having really strong boundaries can be really helpful. As Robert Frost said, good fences make good neighbors. Like respecting your own space, having emotional boundaries, filling your own cup first. Not having walls necessarily, but having a strong foundation for mutual respect. If you find yourself in the anxious category, there's that sense of just constantly wanting to reach over the fence, looking for validation, looking for words of affirmation, looking for confirmation. Some of the tools for healing your woundedness and intimacy, I think probably the first one is just self-awareness. As soon as you become aware of your patterns, of how you close down your capacity for intimacy and love and connection, invaluable. And it really falls under the category of self-study, to really look closely, to really investigate all the conditioning that brings forward your particular patterns. Sometimes someone who can guide you and take you deeper into self-reflection through counseling or therapy can be absolutely invaluable. For me, self-compassion, really, really important. To really see and understand how my attachment style was simply a way of protecting myself. And to see the benefit that that created for me by having that sort of space-taking attachment style, avoidance, and that served me. But also looking at the reality of how it limits me as well. Taking time to look for the good, to kind of fill your cup, to look at the things that really bring you joy. It's so important. Challenging yourself. And challenging your beliefs. If you can get a sense of what is the core belief here? Well, I can't trust anyone, or I'm not good enough, I'm not safe, there's no one out there for me. Can you take some time and challenge those beliefs? What's it like when you believe those thoughts? What if they're not true? What would it be like if they're not true? Who are you without those thoughts? Another element to explore is how you can better express yourself. As someone said, what you can't communicate controls you. What you can't communicate controls you. Is there a way to find language and communication tools that can help you bridge that divide? So much of our lives are driven by unmet needs. To become aware of what you're needing, what you're wanting, and to find the words to communicate that, so powerful. The modality of nonviolent communication is just one of the best tools I know out there. When it comes to healing attachment styles, it's important to be patient, to look for small victories, I find. But it's also helpful to seek out healthy and secure relationships. And this is such a big one. Oh my gosh. There is such a sense of isolation and disconnection in our culture right now. Finding like-minded people, finding people like you, as I often say, it's maybe the most important thing and maybe the hardest thing, depending on where you live and your personality type, etc. If you're an introvert, I highly recommend looking for a meditation community, because for the most part, you can be around people and you don't have to talk to them. And if you're on a retreat, you don't even have to look at them, but it gives you that sense of connection. So, self-awareness and self-study. Looking for someone who might be able to guide you to kind of unwind some of that conditioning that holds you back from loving fully. Practicing self-compassion, challenging your beliefs, exploring how you might communicate more effectively, more mindfully. I believe it was Rumi who said, "Do not seek love, simply seek to address the barriers to love." Wow. So in this tradition, in this mindfulness tradition, we're really exploring cultivating two essential qualities, the two wings of mindfulness. Cultivating wisdom, your capacity to see what's true, and cultivating the heart, cultivating a heart that can hold whatever you discover. And wisdom is about looking at what is actually true. It's the courage to look at, how do I actually show up in other people's lives? How do I close down my capacity for love? What's the reality of how I'm showing up in the world, and how can I heal that? What are the strategies for healing that heart that has been wounded out of no fault of my own? So when it comes to really cultivating love and acceptance, it reminds me of a story, classic story. And this is a story of a well-renowned teacher in a village. And people came from all over to have time with him, to have darshan with him. And one person in particular, who just adored this teacher, built this beautiful vase as a gift. And he presented it with a lot of love and a lot of gratitude. And the teacher was delighted. It was just so beautifully crafted with so much love. And the teacher set it to the side. And as he was teaching, big wind came along, and the vase fell over and broke. And the student was just so upset by that. This beautiful gift that was no longer of value. And the teacher looked at him and said, "It's okay. It was already broken." This remembrance of impermanence is perhaps the most direct way to explore the healing of our attachments, to recognize that it's already broken, it's already gone. When we explore what it means to kind of hold ourselves back from loving fully, a really powerful question. In fact, if you like, you can close your eyes just for a moment or two. And again, you might take just a few slow breaths. And you might bring into mind someone you care about, someone that you're going to see in the next day or two, or maybe this week. What if this was the last time that you would see them? What would that feel like inside? What would you want to say? Are there any actions that would express your inner state? You might deepen your breath. If you like, you might open your eyes. Just a few minutes left. I believe it's in Myanmar where they say, if you want to be happy, think about death 5 times a day. Seems counterintuitive, but I think it's true. When we think about our capacity to love without limits, to love without holding back, it automatically brings up those patterns of anxiety, of disassociation, of all the ways we hold ourselves back. But when we remember impermanence brings in a sense of non-attachment, the capacity to be fully present, to let go of control, a sense of accepting here and now. And when it comes to your particular attachment style, how you attach to love, whether it be secure and mostly healthy and wholesome, whether you find yourself, again, through no fault of yours, to be anxious around intimacy, to be preoccupied about connection. Or if you find yourself on the other side of avoidant, of dismissive, of finding it difficult to access that sense of trust and opening to true intimacy. Or whether you're a mix of the wanting and fearful at the same time. When we remember impermanence, there's this possibility of opening to the mystery of this amazing life. Opening to the mystery of what it means to be intimate in the here and now. So if you like, let's just close with a very short reflection. And you might just take a few moments. Can you feel the delicacy of this breath? Can you imagine what it would mean to love without holding back, and at the same time to recognize that everything is changing? Can you imagine loving without holding back? And sensing at the same time the mystery of this unfolding life. You might gently open your eyes, deepening the breath. We have a drive to connect. And what we seek is connection, intimacy, a reflection of knowing ourselves. Along the way, inevitably, we come in contact with everything that holds us back from loving fully. The more you become aware of the patterns of the conditioning that holds you back, with awareness, with deep investigation, with compassion, it's truly possible to sense what these practices call the flowering of the practice. To be truly awake to reality itself, and to have a heart that can hold anything and everything just as it is. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention. I hope this was helpful. I hope your capacity to love your life even more continues to blossom. Many, many blessings in your practice.